Welcome, everyone, to today's session of Making Thinking Visible, presented by socialstudies.com. I'm Pam Gothard, the Professional Learning Director, and today we have a very special guest. Not only is she one of my colleagues, but I consider her a close friend. It's Dr. Montre Rogers from Houston ISD, and we are super excited to have you, Dr. Rogers. I'm going to turn the session over to you. I know you'll do some introductions yourself. So again, welcome and welcome to all of our participants. We're delighted you could be here today.
Good afternoon. I'm Montre Rogers. Hello, I'm Montre Rogers. I am the Secondary Social Studies Director with the Houston Independent School District, and I'm extremely excited for this opportunity today. I just think we're going to jump right in. Of course, our overall purpose for the webinar is to discuss the text Making Thinking Visible. And I have to be honest with you, when I was first approached and Pam and I discussed our doing something like this, I had not heard of the book. So immediately, of course, I go to Amazon like everyone else does, and I order the book. And I'm telling you, I've not put it down since. So it's become a part of the work that we're doing in Houston. We're framing some things around it, and I hope you'll get a lot out of it today. So our goals are that we will look at and identify a definition for making thinking visible. We will look at possible discrepancies between classroom activities and teaching that is likely to lead to understanding. And then, of course, we will review the thinking routines that serve the purpose of introducing and exploring routines, synthesizing and organizing ideas, and digging deeper into ideas. And we'll go into a little bit more later about what that really means. So here's what it is, because I remember, when I first approached the book, somebody said, "Well, what is it? What is making thinking visible?" And so I had that question myself until I got a little bit into the book, and it refers to those specific thinking strategies and processes students use to build understanding. According to the authors, students develop a greater awareness of thinking processes as they do these routines. They become independent learners capable of managing their own cognitive actions. So that is, they become more aware of how they think. It's sort of the metacognitive piece of it all. While reading the text, I employed Colleen Beers and Robert Prost's questioning stance strategy. And that is, I read with expectation. I asked myself, what surprised me? What caused me to pause or make me say, And it didn't necessarily mean that I didn't know what it meant. It just meant that it made me really stop and think. And oftentimes, if you're an active reader, you might highlight or you might underline. And then after I realized what surprised me, I questioned myself and I said, why was I surprised? And so this is the big piece, what you see before you. It really surprised me. I was surprised by the notion of this, that before we as educators are able to make thinking visible to students, we have to first make the processes and procedures of thinking visible to ourselves. That caused me pause. I'm like, what does this really mean? And then I began to think, okay, so I've asked students to just think without really understanding myself. What is it that I wanted them to do? And then our authors say, too often we do this. They confirmed my thinking. They say, too often we do this, but we don't even know what that means. Are we asking students to make generalizations? Are we asking them to make connections to past knowledge? Are we asking them to ask questions, formulate opinions? What does it really mean? So before we go into detail, I want us to do a little activity because I've talked a lot. And the first thing I want us to do is, if you grab a pen and a paper, or if you're a typer, type a list. I want us to make a list of the actions and activities your students are involved in social studies or engaged in social studies. It's important to know you will use this list to create other lists. So can we take about maybe 3 minutes, 2 minutes to just quick, maybe 4 things that students are engaged in the subject you teach, like social studies. I'm going to try to time myself with this. And so about 2 minutes, make a list.
Dr. Rogers, could you give us just one example to kind of get us started on our list?
Sure, no problem. So, somebody might say in classes, and if you're a coach or you're not in a class, what do you? I might add, what do you observe happening in social studies classroom? So, somebody might say, I see kids analyzing primary sources. Right. Another list might say, I see kids taking notes. I see teachers lecturing. I see
Good.
students. Yeah. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
sure. If you'd like, once you're done, you can just type done, and that could kind of give me a heads up. I don't want to rush your thinking or reflection, but if you could type done, that would be a big help. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. So, using your original list, I want you to take those pieces that kids are doing 75% of the time. So, of everything on your list, which actions are students doing or which account for 75% of what students do? For example, although I might have lecturing, analyzing primary sources, making assertion, problem solving, of those things that I've listed, which of these are 75% of the time? 75% of the time, or the majority of the time. Again, once you're done, if you could type done, I would appreciate it. So, like, take about a minute or two to do that. Okay. So now um, I want us to think about the actions of those that are most authentic to the discipline. That is, those things that actual historians, geographers, political science, economists do. Not what we do in our classroom, but I want us to think about the things that are most authentic to the discipline, those things that historians, geographers, political scientists, and economists do. And then I want us to make a list of that. And we just take probably about a minute again to make a list of those things that are most authentic to the discipline. Again, if you would let me know you're done by putting done in the chat feature. And then finally, your final list. I'm sorry. Okay. I want you to make a list of actions you remember doing yourself from time to time when you were actively engaged in developing new understanding of something within the discipline or area. So, make a list of things. What I would probably do is, as I was trying to uncover primary information or trying to gather information from primary sources, I think about what did I do if I'm trying to gather that new understanding. And perhaps I might have made connections to prior learning to try to bridge themes. Maybe I did text to text connections to other historical texts that were connected to that primary source. So, what did I do as I'm trying to engage in new understanding? And finally, if you'll let me know when you're done, I'd appreciate it. So here's the thing, guys. A lot of you finished already. To the extent that your first list, what students do in the majority of the time, I'm sorry, what students do the majority of the time doing matches the other two lists, your classroom activities are aligned to understanding. So that is, if your list, your first list, what students are doing, or even what you see students doing in the classroom, matches the list that what they do 75% matches what the people who are the experts in the field matches your list. If all of those are aligned, then then your list or your classroom activities are aligned to understanding and thinking. Now, if the list is disconnected, then perhaps your activities might be aligned to the simple things of work and activity, right? So you can have your list can either be aligned such that students are employing thinking skills already, or you might have just awakened yourself to the notion that, hey, we're focused on getting things done. So perhaps we're focused on labeling the map rather than interpreting the map. And so, if that's the case, that just gives us a platform to begin thinking. But what I want to know is, and what I'd like you to add in the chat is, if anything, what surprised you about the list you created? What surprised you about the list you created? Did you see any discrepancies? Were you right on point? What surprised you about the list you created? And why? If you wouldn't mind adding that to the chat feature. Okay. We see some people are saying that the list is much more activity oriented for themselves. It's much more activity oriented. Okay. Task focused. Oh, okay. Very good responses, guys. Thank you. And I also like the fact, I must acknowledge that someone actually used the STEM. I was surprised by. I want to acknowledge that, and I appreciate that as well. Thank you for adding to our chat today. Um, the next piece, guys, is the thinking routines themselves, because this is how the book is organized. You approach the book around, what is thinking, the importance of thinking, the difference between activity and task. There are some pieces on Bloom's, but then we get to the point of the meat, and that is the thinking routines. And so you have a section on introducing and exploring routines that introduce and explore. Then you have a next part on synthesizing and organizing ideas. And then you have a section titled Digging Deeper into Ideas. And so I was like, okay, how am I going to, because there are like 21 routines. So I'm like, how am I going to select the meatiest, or the routine that gives us the bang for the buck? So I was like, I don't want to go to one that I like the most. I don't want to be biased. So what I did, I sought the assistance of instructional coaches in Houston ISD, and I said, hey, I need you to choose a thinking routine that you think is easy to transfer to teachers' instructional practices, that you think would benefit students most in social studies, that you think would lend itself to. I just gave a lot of different criteria, and so here's what we have. We have one that is compass points, and that's going to be, and let me go back and say this. It was good that ironically, they all chose routines from each category. So I didn't have to go and override anything, or, everybody chose a different routine. So the first one that we're going to look at is compass points. And so compass points is a decision-making routine whereby learners explore the advantages and disadvantages, or pluses and minuses of a situation, and they identify the areas that need to be further investigated before taking a final stance. So this puts us in the frame of problem solving, which most of us, people, we always see that in social studies, of problem solving or decision making. So here are the steps. First, you frame the issue, event, or proposition and present it to the learners. That's what the teacher does. From there, the learner identifies what excites them about the idea or proposition, or what might excite others. Next, learners identify worries and concerns about the ideas or the propositions. And then learners identify needs, what additional information, details are needed to better understand the idea. Next, after they get all the information, as we probably know with other problem-solving routines, learners they take a stance. They identify next steps for actions, or make suggestions for enhancing the situation. And then this is most powerful. The final piece here is that they share their thinking. They listen to responses from other learners, and then they identify a common theme or commonality in responses. So not only is this a problem-solving process, right, but at the end it lends itself for academic discourse, which is a whole nother part of thinking and understanding and learning and literacy, because we're giving them the tools that they need to actually have an academic discourse with other learners. Each compass point is written on big paper. They record their personal reactions on sticky notes and then to share with others. So I asked the coaches for some commentary. I asked the coaches for commentary, and this is LaShardra McBride is one of the coaches here. She says, it's very natural for our thinking to be influenced by our personal reactions to an idea or proposition, especially when that idea or proposition has significant meaning. The compass point routine process not only allows learners to assess the pros and cons of ideas, but it requires learners to engage in reflective thinking and consider the idea from different perspectives. Something to think about. The next routine we'll look at is from synthesizing and organizing ideas. And this is called Connect, Extend, Challenge. And this routine helps students make connections between new ideas and prior knowledge. It encourages them to take stock of ongoing questions and difficulties as they reflect on what they are learning. And so when I originally thought about this one, as I was thinking about this, step one is a setup. So before students begin participating in information rich activities, like before they begin listening to a story or reading a passage or even viewing a video, you want them to be mindful of how their new learning connects with what they already know. And so in my mind, I immediately went to dialectical journaling, where we ask students to take the information that they learn and they make a text to text connection, they make a text to self connection, or they make a text to world connection. Then after that, the connect part, have students take note of how what they've just experienced, the learning, the information rich learning, connects to what they've already explored or thought about. Again, that's that text to text, text to self, text to world. And then you ask, how how do the ideas and information you've just heard connect to ideas you've already thought about or knew? Now it's important, and they add, it's important to allow students to write their connections individually before having any group conversation. Allow that writing piece to take place. The next piece is the extend piece. Now, this prompts students to identify how their ideas have broadened, deepened, or expanded in some ways because of the new learning. Major question here: how has your thinking been extended in some way, taking it in new or deeper directions? Again, have students individually record their notes. And then the next one is the challenge. They need to consider ideas that seem challenging in the topic. And then here's a probing question: what challenges have come up in your mind about this topic now that you have been presented with these new ideas and information? And I think the important piece is the questioning piece, because what you're doing is you're taking them through a process of thinking. You're taking them through the point that they connect, and you're giving them a reflection question so that they are able to connect, so that it prompts their thinking for connection. And then finally, again, we see the share your thinking. Once students have a chance to respond, let them share their thoughts with a partner or small group. It's important that they provide a rationale or thoughts behind their made selection. Again, we're having students engage in academic discourse. A group can have the conversation in parts. That's what I would suggest. So after each part, let them have the conversation rather than waiting until the end. The commentary, it's helpful in social studies classrooms because we learn lots of new information all the time. And oftentimes kids see this information as disconnected from one another. It helps them to make connections to things that they've already learned. And I like this piece that Jamie Philippo pulled from the text. They are able to fasten ideas together. It's simple. It can be used anytime new information or context is presented, which is the vast majority of the year for social studies. But I think I have to emphasize that the important piece is the questioning that guides the thinking. And then the final routine that we're going to look at is from the category of digging deeper into ideas. What makes you say that? And it helps students identify the basis for their thinking, asking them to elaborate on their thinking that lies behind their responses. And that's kind of connected to the share piece in Connect Extend, the previous one, Connect Extend Challenge. So each of these have some overlapping themes. What I also like is that they have a lot of opportunity for discourse with students. So this helps them to elaborate. Steps are pretty kind of simple. Anywhere a student is able to provide a response, you provide them the question with what makes you say that. So anytime a student makes an assertion, gives an explanation, offers an opinion, simply what makes you say that. Push for elaboration with evidence. This is hard for students. So students have lots of opinions, but sometimes they don't quite know how to back that up. And so using questions such as what makes you say that, or so what do you know that makes you say that, is a pretty good tool to use to help students. And finally, next, since the thinking of what makes you say that exists mainly in the interchange that students have with their students, and while documentation of thinking is an option, it is important, simply creating an opportunity for them to share what they're thinking is enough to enrich conversation. So there we have the academic discourse piece. And this routine was chosen by the instructional coach, Sydney Fairbanks. And her point is this, her main point is this. It requires very little in the way of capacity, right? So the routine can be easily embedded into a teacher's instructional practice. But what is important is that they support their assertion with evidence. They support their opinion with evidence. And then it is also important that this is a wonderful tool to use with conferencing as students draft their assertions and thesis statements in social studies writing. So this is a tool as you conference with the student around his writing in social studies that you might use as well. And so what I'm curious to learn is, how has your thinking been changed, challenged, or confirmed by the information presented today? And if you would leave that in the chat section, I'm sure I'd love to see if or how has your thinking been changed, challenged, or confirmed by the information presented today, and why? And why?
Fabulous. So while people are responding to that, how they were, let's see, if their thinking has been changed, challenged, or confirmed. I don't know, Monterey, but I think back, I haven't been in the classroom in a while, but I think back to those classroom days and how did I spend 75% of my time versus maybe what I was thinking I was doing may have not been what I was actually doing in practice. There might have been a disconnect between my thought of what I was doing and what I was actually putting into practice. And maybe that sounds kind of crazy, but I think that there could be a disconnect there.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there was a disconnect. You knew what should be happening, but sometimes we know, like, so our I think I don't want to confuse the two, theories in use and personal action theory. So we know what should happen. We've gone to all the right webinars. We've gotten the right information, but sometimes that just doesn't transition into our practice. And I'm really curious about that. And so as I read this book, I think even engaging in the thinking routines within, let's say, your professional development with teachers helps bring it to light. So it makes it more intentional when you have a routine attached to it, right? So you look at your actions and you say, okay, so how are the kids? I always like to say, how are they digesting the information? Am I really cognizant about that? How will they receive the information? And in truth, I have to be honest with you guys. After reading this, we're looking at curriculum to see, are we being explicit about thinking routines within the framework of the lesson? So
I think what you said was so important, and you're getting some good comments there, so I'm going to let you look at those in a moment, but just to articulate what we are talking about when we say thinking, because students don't always know what thinking means, and as you pointed out, maybe we don't either unless we verbalize it, write it down, reflect, do something with it ourselves. But enough of what I had to say. Let's see what some of your participants have had to say.
Pam, are you able to help me with the reading? A little
yes,
small for me. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Let me read this one. Let's see. This one is, I did a book study on this book with my colleagues several years ago. Identifying the strategies has confirmed my thinking, especially as we work toward embedding inquiry into our curriculum. And boy, that's getting big, right?
Yeah,
The
it is.
compass points routine provides a valuable piece, having students ask, what information do I need to better understand the idea? Puts this on us of learning more on the student. Right, takes it a little bit off of us and puts it more on the student. I can see where this kind of thinking and visualizing our thinking could fit in beautifully with personalized learning.
Oh, it does. When he said, "What else? What additional information do I need?" Immediately, I thought about the inquiry design model.
Here's another one. This one's from Anne. My thinking has been confirmed by the information presented today because I've always believed that students need to be taught to think overtly. Great. Good to have
Yep.
you. Let's see. And here's another one. This one is from Jason. My thinking's been challenged by forcing me to look inward to determine how I can be more effective when engaging with learners. Utilizing some of these strategies and integrating them into my workshops will make me more effective. I totally
I
agree.
I love that.
Let's see what else we have. If we have some more, I think I've got all of those.
Think you've got all of
Oh,
those.
wait a minute. Here's another one. I'm sorry. Additionally, as a coach, I see a lot of lecture and notes as much and not as much student engagement. I think how the strategies push the learning back to the student. Here's another one. Part of the value of the book and the whole MTV approach is identifying them as routines. These should happen as a matter of routine as opposed to an occasional instructional strategy. Ooh.
Oh, good job. Because the authors talk about the difference between strategies and routines, and they say strategies are occasional, but routines are things that we do so much it becomes automatic. And we actually talked about with the coaches, and I told you that we were so excited about this book that it extended into our work, but we had talked about the notion of anchor charts, and the authors talk about this too. This becomes what we do to the extent that students look for it. They look for the steps. Okay, am I doing this first? So I totally agree with the notion of strategy versus routine.
Wonderful. You had some really nice, rich comments there. I love it. Yes, very, very nice. Well, let's wrap up. It looks like we've had some really good dialogue there. We really appreciate everybody coming to the webinar today. When you receive it, please do feel free to share the link. And as you leave today, please take our short questionnaire at the end. Dr. Rogers, it's been a pleasure. This is really something that can truly impact the learning process. And I just appreciate you diving into this and really kind of sorting it out for us.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to engage with you guys today.
You guys have a great afternoon and watch for the link tomorrow. We'll be happy to have you watch the recorded session or share that with your colleagues. Again, thanks everybody for joining in. Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you at another webinar in the near future.